Good morning, everyone.
Good morning to all.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, madam. Good morning.
Good morning, sir. Good morning.
Good morning, madam.
To all.
Good morning,
Good
sir.
morning.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, ma'am.
Morning, madam.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, madam.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning, sir. Good morning to all. Have a pleasant day today.
Good morning, sir. Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning to all. நான் பேசுறது எல்லாரும் கேக்குதா? எனக்கு கனெக்ஷன்ல இருக்கனா என்ன டவுட் வருது. கேக்குதா மேடம்?
Yes, ma'am. You are audible. You are audible.
ஓகே சார். தேங்க் யூ சார். மேம். தேங்க் யூ.
Thank you. Thank you. You are audible.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Class.
நீ பேசிட்டே இரு, இந்த மைக் எடுத்துரும்.
So I think most of them come to the session. So shall we start? Dr. Madam?
Yes.
Shall we start?
Yes, sir. We can, sir. Yes, sir.
Of course, today we have with us Dr.Y.Srinivasa Rao, Associate Professor and Head, Department of History of our university. He's my colleague and our department, our colleague. Of course, more than a decade, I had a relationship with Dr. Rao. Undoubtedly, he is a real and true researcher and very excellent teacher. Not only that, his man is a very simplicity and easily accessible man. And of course, who is wide range of contact, both national and international level. He is active participants in the social medias, and he is a person who is always initiating any kind of academic debates. He is such a capable person. So on behalf of this professor course, that is History and Cultural Studies, Professor Course 2, of course he is the coordinator of the first History and Cultural Studies, Professor Course 1 coordinator, Dr. Rao. Of course, we are very happy to invite and welcome Dr. Rao for this session, that is History and Cultural Studies, Course 2 session. So I welcome. Of course, the formal welcome address made as participant. I hand over the mic to our representative, our participant representative, Madam. She is going to participate. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to all. Good morning, our resource person. For today's welcome address, to propose welcome address and also to introduce our resource person, I welcome Dr. K. Ashokan.
Ma'am, not audible.
Am I audible, sir?
Okay.
Am I audible, sir?
Okay. Please.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, you carry on.
To give welcome address.
Yes, madam.
And also introduce the resource person, I welcome Dr. K. Ashokan, sir. Please, sir. Dr. Ashokan, sir.
Sir, you are not audible. Ashokan, sir.
அவர்களை முனைவர் பேராசிரியர் சீனிவாசராவ் அவர்களை பாரதிதாசன் பல்கலைக்கழகத்தின் ரசாயன சார்பாகவும் இந்த நிகழ்வை சிறப்பாக வழிநடத்திக் கொண்டிருக்கின்ற ஐயா தமிழ்நாதன் மற்றும் பேராசிரியர் முனைவர் அசோன் ஐயா அவர்களின் சார்பாகவும் இந்த நிகழ்வில் பங்கேற்றுக் கொண்டிருக்கின்ற பேராசிரியர் பெருமக்களின் சார்பாகவும் இருவரும் கூப்பி ஐயா அவர்களை வருக வருக என ஐயாவை வரவேற்பதோடு அறிமுக உரையாக பேராசிரியர் முனைவர் ஸ்ரீனிவாச ராவ் ஐயா அவர்கள் இணை பேராசிரியராக வரலாற்று துறையில் பாரதிதாசன் பல்கலைக்கழகத்தில் பணியாற்றி வருகிறார். ஐயா அவர்கள் முனைவர் பட்டத்தை ஐஐடியில் சென்னையிலும் ஆய்வு நிறைவேற்ற பட்டார்கள். MA ஹைதராபாத் பல்கலைக்கழகத்திலும் நிகழ்த்தியுள்ளார். மேலும் ரிசர்ச் கைடன்ஸ் அதை PhD-யில் 3 மாணவர்களும் எம்பிலில் 36 மாணவர்களும் ஐயாவிடமிருந்து நிறைவு பெற்று சென்றிருக்கிறார்கள் என்பது இங்கே குறிப்பிடத்தக்கது. மேலும் he is a member of various society institutions, member of Society of History and Technology USA, member of Loyola Institute of Social Science Training and Research India, South Indian History Congress Life member, Indian History Congress Life member என்ற பல்வேறு பொறுப்புகள் இருந்தார். ஐயா அவர்கள் மெம்பர் ஆஃப் போர்ட் ஆஃப் ஸ்டடீஸ் MA ஹிஸ்டரி பாரதிதாசன் பல்கலைக்கழகத்திலும் MA ஹிஸ்டரி கரூர் ஆர்ட்ஸ் காலேஜ் அந்த MA அண்ட் BA ஜோசப் காலேஜ் அண்ட் பெரியார் யூனிவர்சிட்டி சேலம், BA MA சீதாலட்சுமி ராமசாமி காலேஜ் திருச்சி என்று பல்வேறு கல்வி தளங்களில் ஐயா தொடர்ந்து தன்னுடைய நிகழ்வுகளை நிகழ்த்தி கொண்டிருக்கிறார். மேலும் 2 விருதுகளை பெற்றுள்ளார். இன்டர்நேஷனல் ஸ்காலர் ஆஃப் தாட்ஸ் சிறந்த நூலக பயன்பாட்டாளர் விருதையும் ஐயா அவர்கள் 2019 பெற்றுள்ளார் என்பது இங்கு குறிப்பிடத்தக்கது. மேலும் ஒரு நூலினையும் 13 ஆய்வு கட்டுரைகளையும் ஐயா இதுவரை நிகழ்த்தி இருக்கிறார் என்பதும் இங்கு குறிப்பிடத்தக்கதாக உள்ளது. ஐயாவை பற்றி கூற வேண்டுமானால் தொடர்ந்து கூறிக்கொண்டே இருக்கலாம். அந்த அளவுக்கு தன்னுடைய ஆய்வு தளங்களில் தன்னோட அர்ப்பணிப்போடு இயங்கி கொண்டிருக்கும் ஐயா அவர்களை மீண்டும் ஒரு முறை வருக வருக என்ற வரவேற்று காலத்தின் அருமை கருதி HRDC சார்பாகவும் பேராசிரியர் சார்பாகவும் சத்யநாதன் சார்பாகவும் அசோன் சார் சார்பாகவும் வருக வருக என்று கூறி விடைபெறுகிறேன். நன்றி.
This is the time to Dr. Rao.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Asokan, for inviting me, and HRDC giving me for the opportunity to speak to you. So I thought of speaking about the significance of science and history of science, technology, and environment. I am not sure if I am going to cover all these 3 in detail, but however, I will try my level best. And I also must confess that I am not going to have a PPT. I'll give you a study material, but you'll have to see me throughout. So that's what my submission is. Anyway, so when we say the history of science, technology, and environment, both all these 3 disciplines, of course, there is medicine which comes under history of science. All these 3 are having a triangular relationship: science, technology, and environment. In the pre-modern times, that is before an organized knowledge system or an organized theory on the nature was produced, that is from the 17th century onwards, or from 1660s onwards, when the Francis Bacon proposed that knowledge is power. So the production of knowledge on the nature could be possibly used for the betterment and prosperity of the human civilization. So that can be taken as a beginning of the organized usage of the nature and organized production of knowledge on the nature. And 1750s can be taken as a starting point for the mechanization of the production or automatization of the production. So that means 17th century, 1660s, before that can be considered as pre-modern times, where the relationship between the humans and the nature was harmonious because the means and methods of using the nature were non-mechanical. Therefore, the degree of usage of the nature certainly would be lesser. Once an organized knowledge or a theoretical knowledge, a practical knowledge through usage of the science or scientific method was introduced from 17th century onwards, there is a detailed knowledge on the nature and its properties. So therefore, usage of the nature would be easy. But however, prior to the 17th century, most of the science and technology, and since they were non-mechanical, of course they are technological, whatever you call them, technical, technological, doesn't matter. Mechanical also was there. However, the mechanization of the production was not much in the pre-modern times. So it is obvious that the relationship between the nature and the human was harmonious, and it was sort of a give and take, or the power of the nature is much more compared to that of the human power or the human control, human mastery over the nature. So pre-modern science, I'm only using the word pre-modern by clearly making it clear that the usage of the scientific method for production of knowledge on the nature and introduction of mechanization of production from the 18th century onwards, which was used in Industrial Revolution. So prior to the modern times, I'm very consciously using, but in our history, we do not say 1600 is modern times. We go back a bit 15th century with the proposition of new theories on the inner universe and outer universe by the Copernicus, as well as Adrius Vesalius on the inner universe as well as outer universe. So we take that as a beginning of the modern times in terms of modern science. But however, in terms of usage of the nature, an organized usage of the nature and the mechanized usage of the nature, we can comfortably say 17th century and 18th century. So Industrial Revolution and the proposition of scientific method by proposition of scientific method by Francis Bacon from 1660s onwards. So then the relationship after the organized production of knowledge on the nature and after the mechanization of the production, the relationship between the humans and the nature gone worse. Gone worse in the sense that the relationship between the human and nature has gone worse. That was not realized when it has gone worse, or began to be derailed. Only in 1950s we have the entire world, especially the industrial society, the highly industrial societies called North America and the Western Europe, have came to a realization that things have gone worse. So therefore, it took 2 centuries of organized production, the problems with the organized production of material knowledge on the nature and organized usage, or the mechanization of the usage of the nature, went uncontrolled or unassessed for almost 2 centuries or 2.5 centuries. So after that, into 1950s around, there is a realization, especially by the society, which has very effectively used, or quote unquote effectively means sometimes we get a positive meaning, but when I say effectively, I also refer to the negativity of the organized usage of the nature or mechanization of the using of nature. So the relationship has changed, but that was not realized by the human society for 2 centuries. only the problematized relationship between the nature and the human was realized in 1950s. So from 1950s onwards, we began to assess what kind of damage has been done to the nature, what kind of damage has been done to the human activity, what kind of systems of production we have used, what kind of systems of exploitation have been adopted for a long, that is 2 centuries, from 1750 to 1950. So let me now say that the history of science and technology as disciplines, part of history or part of social sciences, as part of interdisciplinary movement, have began in order to assess the human relationship between the nature and the way these two tools, that is science and technology, were used or employed by the humans in order to develop themselves or accumulate the wealth of the human race, or for prosperity, and so on and so forth. This relationship they wanted to assess and go back assess. So out of that concern, in 1950s, around 1970s, 1970s and 80s, this is the time where the interdisciplinary movement in the world, especially started in North America as well as Western Europe, the interdisciplinary movement was gaining up, and this agenda of the interdisciplinary movement is to address the damage done to the civilization, in other words, to the planet, or other words, to the prospects of our living. So this is what the agenda of history of science and technology, when it was born. Of course, environment is also there. So while talking about the triangular relationship, while the science and technology, science is a means of understanding the nature, technology is a means of utilizing the nature, and nature is there in both. Understand? So without nature, one has to understand there is nothing called production. Without nature, in terms of science, without nature, there is nothing called production of knowledge on physical existence. Natural science, what we call, what do we mean by natural science? Natural science is science on the nature. And of course, science has to another side of the, as I told you earlier, the inner universe and the outer universe. Inner universe is, these words are used by J.D. Bernal in his Science in History. Inner universe is the universe that you cannot see with your naked eyes. You have to open something up and see, or you have to use the scientific tools and scientific instruments to see something you cannot see with your naked eyes. That is inner universe. Outer universe is what you see with your eyes, but your eyes may not help you to see beyond certain point. So therefore, for that also you need scientific instruments. So therefore, science outer, as far as outer universe, science is also looking physical into the physical objects away from our planet. That is, I'm referring to the universe. So there is physics, there is astronomy also comes under science. But however, when I use the science here, you have to get a meaning that I am referring only to the natural science. So natural science is a science that offers you to the understanding on the nature. Technology is a means of developing the means and methods of using the nature. So in these both, there is nature, which means without nature, you cannot produce anything. In fact, the human relationship with the nature, I have to refer here to the Black Death in the 1340s for the first time, that because of the during the age of faith, that is from the 5th century CE to the 12th century CE, you have the domination of the metaphysical philosophy or religion. Simply somebody's mic is on, it is disturbing. Yeah, metaphysical philosophy or the philosophy of the religion has been dominating the human civilization, according to J.D. Bernal, from 5th century CE to the 12th century CE. So 12th century CE is roughly the beginning of the Renaissance. So in this time, according to J.D. Bernal, the opportunity for understanding the human relation with the nature was controlled or reduced or eliminated, because the theory of creation and the theory of creation across all religions says that you are the byproduct of the God's plan. So therefore, you need not have to worry what you are, how you are, what your body is. I create you and I kill you. So this is the theory of creation. But when you locate yourself in the real nature, you will have the enemies to your body, and those bodies are natural, and you are all just part of a nature. So therefore, if you don't understand the enemies of your body, which are part of the nature, you will not be able to provide solutions to the pains of the body. So therefore, that relationship was actually not allowed to be understood by the humans, because the metaphysical philosophy does not allow you to do that. So therefore, understanding between the nature and the human was quite minimal. That relationship was never allowed to be understood. Only when the Black Death, like that we are experiencing today, a plague that has killed lakhs of people, crores of people, started in Central Asia, spread to Europe. Then for the first time ever, the Europeans or the Christian world began to ask the questions on the idea of death, how people die, why people die, what are the causes of the death, and so on and so forth. So therefore, that has for the first time ever forced the human to really understand or relate themselves to the existing nature, and that they're part of the nature, and whatever happens to the body, there are only two ways of understanding the body, problems of the body. One is mechanical, the another is biological. So mechanical understanding is provided by Ardrius Vesalius, and for the first time in 1543, he has provided the theory of anatomy, and so body as a machine is understood. But then biological flesh and blood of the body, it needs some time. But however, for the first time, how the flesh and blood of the body is affected by the natural enemies, was forced to be understood by the humans, by the bacteria, a virus in 1343 called as Black Death. So after that, of course, there is a continuity of understanding the relationship between the nature and human body. So now, from that point of angle, there is a beginning was made. But as far as the usage of the nature, relation between the human body and the nature, a beginning was made in the 14th century. But as far as the usage of the nature and effects of the usage of the nature, or the problems of the usage of the nature, was not understood till 1950s. Why? Human society was given an impression by the capitalism, which took up from 17th century, 18th century onwards. We took over the production process, or dominated the production process, monopolized the production process, said that the nature is having abundant resources. So therefore, you need not have to worry. So this continuous repetition of the nature is having abundant resources. Nature or the mother earth can never dry, of its natural resources. So you continuously produce and continuously consume. You need not have to worry. So this philosophy, this sets good. This is good for the capitalist philosophy, and capitalism continuously keep on repeating the same thing, that the mother planet is having abundant resources. But that is not the case. It is already proved. In 2 centuries' time, it is already proved that the capitalism is lying to the human race. So if what capitalism is saying is a truth, then we do not have pollution problem. If what capitalism is saying truth, we do not have depletion of resources. If capitalism is saying true, we do not have climate change or global warming. So while that what capitalism is saying for a long time, that the mother nature is having enough resources, adequate resources, is a lie. So humans fell for that lie because it is natural for the human to be comfortable. So as long as you are comfortable, you don't see the problems that are actually just existing next to you. So we have ignored, the human race has ignored under the blinkers called development and progress. These two blinkers have blinded our view from seeing what is happening to the rivers, what is happening to the seas, what is happening to the groundwater, what is happening to the resources, what is happening to the animals, what is happening to the birds. So all this actually we have ignored. We refuse to realize the reality, and so therefore we are having a problem called crisis of civilization, which is consisted of 3 important problems that I have already mentioned. One is the pollution, another is resource depletion, and another is global warming or climate change. So then, coming to the agenda of history of science and technology and environment as well, this is the agenda of these 3 disciplines, which are part of the interdisciplinary movement called to understand how the crisis that we are facing, to produce knowledge on how the crisis we are facing for the last 2 centuries, what is our relationship with the nature, what kind of technologies we have used in order to create wealth and prosperity, and what kind of scientific understanding we had on the nature for a long time, and where we went wrong, in what wrong ways we have used the nature. So these are all the agendas of the history of science and technology. So that is to say that the history of science and technology tells you that where things went wrong, but however, history of science and technology also tells you the value of science and technology. So value of science and technology, we as students of history, we are actually degraded or downgraded as the people who do not produce any knowledge on the produce exact knowledge or a scientific knowledge on many things. So we are treated as some unequal citizens, academicians, some useless academicians for long. But look at the science and technology that has produced the exact knowledge, and so it got the value for being exact and being very powerful, being valuable, being economically viable. So science and technology has acquired its value because they are useful, quote in quote. I'm putting the word useful in quote in quote in order to tell you that their use is in question now. Their utility is in question now. The way they are used in question now. And we are blaming science and technology. There is no doubt for the crisis that we are facing. However, I am not dismissing the importance of science and technology as the tools of understanding the reality, truth, existing truth of nature, inner universe, outer universe. I am not dismissing the importance of them, but the science and technology came to the scrutiny of the human society today. We are using the words called bad science and bad technology with an intention of trying to point out their usage has been determined by the selfish, capitalist, and other forces. So therefore, what we are questioning here, if you are questioning the science and technology, we are questioning the way the science and technology was used in order to, quote unquote, produce the progress and wealth or prosperity. So therefore, from that point of view, one has to look at how science and technology have acquired their value, but how their value that is accorded to them because of being economically viable, being exact and all that. But in the beginning stages, we glorified, we celebrated science. Today we are blaming them, questioning them, and trying to reform them, control them. We are not letting the science and technology to behave on its own or to be used by the capitalist forces, government, according to their will and wish. We are trying to control them. We are protesting them. We are running social movements against science and technology that is unused and unsuitable, dangerous. I'm using these words: unsuitable, dangerous. Therefore, I request you to understand that I'm not totally dismissing science and technology, but I'm only saying that the way science and technology was used and employed by the selfish forces in this world have led to the crisis that we are facing today. So the value of the science and technology cannot blindly be taken into consideration. That was the case when first the Industrial Revolution was gaining momentum. That was the case when the natural science was gaining momentum. Today, so society was so historically conscious. The general society is also having enough information on what is science and technology doing to the society. So therefore, general society itself is responding to the way science and technology being employed. So production of wealth is not a matter, production of progress is not a matter, progress is not a matter, prosperity is not a matter. Today, the debate is that whether we are going to live or not. The survival is the question. Okay, so therefore, when the science
Rao sir,
situation,
not audible, sir.
Yeah, just a technical problem. So, so just a technical problem. So therefore, science and technology as part of the interdisciplinary movement, environment as an interdisciplinary movement. These three disciplines have came around in 1950 to 1960. There are plenty of in North America especially, there are plenty of professional associations started realizing the importance of science and understanding the science and technology. For example, history of science, history of society for the history of technology, for example, where I am a member. Science, technology, and society. There are plenty of associations for the sociologists of science, economics of science, cultural studies of science, and so on and so forth, as well as technology. So plenty of professional associations have emerged on their own without the help of governments, because they realized that the government certainly would oppose the assessing the technology and science. So they most of these professional associations on science, technology, and environment have emerged on their own. And as like in 16th century, where the Royal Science Academy of the Britain has emerged without any government help, same is the case with the professional associations on history of science and technology and environment emerging in the Europe as well as North America in order to provide the needed sociological, historical, cultural, and political as well as environmental assessment and analysis on history of science and on science, technology, and nature. So of course this is the time, 1960s, 1950s to 80s is the time where you see the emergence of institutions like not only professional associations, but also institutions. Later, governments came to the understanding, yes, what scientists are saying is true, and what historians are saying is true, what sociologists of science and science and technology are saying is true, that the things have gone worse. So therefore, we need to have the government-sponsored institutions to conduct studies on the history of science, technology, and nature. So here, governments were brought to the understanding by the scientists. I am not saying scientists are also part of it. Scientists as well as social science community together. So they realized the problem, and they have convinced the governments the upcoming danger, and they have asked the government to support the institutions that are supposed to carry out the analysis on the way science technology were used and the damage caused to the nature. So of course, the North America is the first country to realize, especially the US and Canada, and then the rest of the, of course, European countries also followed the suit. So in this also, we are they are first, we are next. But however, the gap between the European, North American, European countries in starting the studies on history of science and technology, or STS, Science Technology Society studies, mostly this is carried out by the social scientists called anthropology, sociology, political sciences, and so on and so forth. The STS studies, they came in 1980s around. The STS studies are science and technology studies, history of science and technology studies, studies on environment. All of them in a 3 decades time have spread, like mushroomed in a large way throughout the world. And though they took birth in the European North America, but they did not take much time to come into the non-European societies as well, because the pattern of the usage in the colonized by the colonial would be same. Colonies by the colonial would be same. You don't see much of a difference. Maybe it took some time for them to accelerate the usage of the nature in the colonies. So Britain used the way it used itself in terms of nature usage. So Britain used India similarly the way it used itself, the accelerated usage of the nature. But of course, colonies are much more worstly used than its own mother countries. Anyway, so point is to say that India was not lagging behind in starting the STS studies or the studies on history of science and technology. Now, just 1960s it has started. 1950s the movement called the interdisciplinary movement started, and immediately in a decade, India also joined the interdisciplinary movement. The government of India started NISTADS, National Institute for Science, Technology and Society Developmental Studies. So it has started in 1960s. This is where the famous historians in history of science and technology in India have emerged, and then they later spread into different institutions, universities. Deepak Kumar is one, Irfan Habib Jr. is one, Dhruva Raina is one, and his wife, I forgot her name, so she is also one, Dinos Obrol is one. So all of them have emerged from NISTADS, which is specially started for understanding the impact of science, technology, and society. That is to understand the relationship between science, technology, and society. That is to say that we are not lagging behind in history of science, technology studies compared to that of the North America or Western Europe. We are just a decade later, that's all. So apart from that, out of this movement concern, in fact, many historians called this as a social academic movement. The history of science, technology, and environment, or the STS studies, all these combinedly, the academicians, social science experts called it as a social academic movement. They consider it as a movement. Actually, we don't consider academic activity as a movement. But as far as science, technology, nature, environment is concerned, the academician cannot be a typical academician who does not care about what is happening outside his four walls of office, or he or she cannot limit themselves to just production of knowledge, producing analysis, or writing books and articles. So an academician on the history of nature is supposed to be environmental activist. Same is the case with an academician who is studying history of science, history of technology. Because the agenda of science and technology, history of science and technology and the nature, is that an academician is supposed to investigate the relationship between the nature, science, technology for almost 2 centuries to provide solutions, academic solutions, to the crisis of civilization. So such a person cannot be influenced, cannot resist from influencing himself from the work he produced, because what he or she are were studying, what the damage caused to the nature, damage caused to the self-existence. So therefore, there certainly be emotional, certain to be aggressive, certain to be persons with aggraved emotions. So all of them would say like this is the problem. So we need to be more than academicians. So that's why the academicians in 1960s and 70s and 80s called the history of science, technology, and environmental studies as the social academic movements. So which means they're socially responsible academicians. They're not the academicians, they just produce knowledge and keep away from trying to see that what they said is being gone into the policy, what they said is gone into the society, general society, and the general society is realizing what is being told by them. So all these things were actually taken into their hearts. So therefore, they are not just academicians, but are also social activists, historians of science, technology, and environment. They're bound to be social activists because their studies telling them that this is the serious problem. So just being an academician, producing an article, writing a book is not enough. You have to be extra careful or extra responsible that make sure that the networks of professionals, historians of science, historians of technology, historians of environment, are putting some pressure on the pressure on the government to bring what they study into the policy, or to bring what they study into the general nature in the form of knowledge, or in the form of popularization of science, technology, the way science and technology uses. So popularization of knowledge on science, technology would go into the general masses. It will not stay within the academic circles or government circles or bureaucracy. It has to go beyond the bureaucracy. So coming to the next point is that out of the environmental consciousness, after realizing the problems of the crisis of civilization, one has to establish a relationship between the academics. That academic relationship was first time understood and realized and proposed by C.P. Snow. C.P. Snow is a British academician. He has actually found out that though later social sciences also brought in, C.P. Snow has found out that though he was not referring to the crisis of civilization is caused by the distance between the humanities and science. He very carefully used humanities and science. Also, you can use social sciences into the humanities and technology and engineering into the other group. So he has proposed a two cultures theory in 1960. C.P. Snow has proposed two cultures theory in 1950. So what is this two cultures theory? What is his intention? What he wanted to say is that the term two cultures theory refers to the failure of scientists and humanists to comprehend the content, nature, and implications of each other's intellectual activities. In other words, he was saying that there is no enough relationship between the humanities. When he used the humanities, of course, today we loosely use humanities as a separate academic category where we place social sciences also. But he was referring to the literature. So humanities on one hand, science on the other hand, fail to interact with each other. So that the academic distance between these two groups, according to his understanding, has resulted in population growth, of course, the uncontrolled production, and other such problems. What he said that there has to be a proper relationship, a give and take relationship between the scientists and the people from humanities. So he was especially referring to the people from literature, and by doing that, he says that scientists had not read Jane Austen, and the humanists could not describe the second law of thermodynamics. So he is complaining that Jane Austen's literary work was not read by the scientists, and the second law of thermodynamics was not understood by the people from literature. He called them as humanists. This is true. The distance between the two academics is true. Watertight compartment. They are compartmentalized into watertight sections, categories. So they could not have any interaction between them. So that is the reason why, according to his understanding, that the problems in 1950s that have appeared. So though he has not referred to the crisis of civilization, but he was referring to the uncontrolled growth and population growth and so on and so forth as a serious problems was resulted out of the distance between these two academic areas. One is literature, another is scientists. But of course, we can include social sciences into the literature category and engineering into the science category. So we have to upgrade CP's two cultures theory. These two academic cultures, what he says, these two academic cultures do not borrow from each other, do not try to understand each other. So that is a serious problem. That would cause serious problem. That is a problem why society is facing problems. So he further says that when these two disciplines come together, then society would not face problems. When these two disciplines come together, or the academic cultures come together, society will not face problems. What was his intention in saying so? A humanized scientist, a humanized engineer would try to locate his or his inventions within the social context. Most of the science and technology, especially when the science and technology was overtaken by the capitalism, the science and technology, as like that of the human nature relationship, lost the relationship with the human. Science and technology lost the relationship with human, which means science and technology did not care what human wanted. Science and technology was guided or manipulated by the capitalism. So the kind of science and technology produced from 1700 onwards, that is 1750 onwards, is a science and technology that was needed for the capitalism, not to the human society, quote unquote. I am putting that quote unquote because I may not be entirely true, but however, largely that is the truth. If the science and technology located within the social context of the every culture, be Europe, be India, be China, be Japan, whatever, the kind of damage that we are seeing could have been very less. Since science and technology was overtaken by the capitalism, capitalism did not care about whether the science and technology has been useful to the humans or not, or what kind of damage simultaneously it is being causing to the humans. Industrial revolution, though I am not dismissing, as like many of our leaders of the nation did, but however, there are problems in the industrial revolution, but the problems of industrial revolution from the beginning was not realized, because the growth was celebrated, progress was celebrated, development was celebrated by the humans, because the technology was liberating human from so many things, quote unquote. But that liberating the human has gone to the extent of controlling the human and dominating the human. So we have the technologies today. In the beginning, technologies were liberating the humans from pain and suffering from hard work. But today, technologies are controlling, dominating the humans. So, in other words, technological philosophy and scientific philosophy, when it comes to the utilitarian philosophy, that you need to have a control on the way science and technology was put to the human purpose. It has gone beyond the human purpose, and we are being controlled and managed and dominated by the science and technology today. So that is what is the problem. So this problem is there from the beginning, but in degree it is less. It was not realized. And it was not realized, it probably not the mistake of the human society in general, but capitalism do not want you to realize that problem. If you realize it, you would oppose it. Of course, there is from the beginning there are certain intellectuals began to see the problems with the industrial revolution, and they try to minimize the mechanization of the production. They have been arguing. Of course, M.K. Gandhi is one such person. They're trying to highlight the problems of the industrial revolution from the very beginning, over mechanization of the production. But however, there are problems with the M.K. Gandhi's anti-missionary philosophy or anti-missionary arguments. So coming back to the question of why such a relationship between the human science and technology is gone worse or gone bad. Why the relationship between science and technology and the humans was not let to be understood by the capitalism. If I ask the question why, you would certainly understand that capitalism wants free hand to produce continuously. That's it. Accumulation of the wealth. If the accumulation of the wealth is controlled by any agency, capitalism would not grow. So therefore, capitalism should have a free hand to use the nature. That's why we are, even till today, we are having problems when the nature usage is controlled by the conscious general society. Capitalism will generate its own strategies to counter it. So today, general society of the entire world is very well conscious about the importance of the nature, and it itself is trying to protect the nature by running so many environmental movements, environmental conscious. So therefore, capitalism will get into a kind of uncomfortable position and try to generate strategies to counter any environmental protective movements. It turns all those kind of environmental protection movements as anti-development, environmental romanticism. Like Madha Patkar is actually termed as anti-development. Her environmental philosophy is also called as environmental romanticism that blocks development, so on and so forth. So these are countering strategies by the capitalism. Whenever people are trying to try to protect the nature and carry out at individual level, carry out environmental movement or lead a mass environmental movement, environmental protection movement. So therefore, such kind of countering is possible, and that countering being done. So as I told you, in 1960s itself, C.P. Snow has realized the importance of the relationship between the two broad academic cultures, that is in humanities and the sciences. So if they do not understand, do not borrow from each other, and do not interact, then there will be a serious problem. Why? Because a humanized engineer would try to produce technology that is less harmful, less dangerous to the society. If the engineer is not humanized, how the humanization takes place? Through teaching of literature. What is literature? Literature is an expression of human emotions and sentiments. So human emotions or sentiments are important for a scientist and an engineer. But when they are lacking of it, their technology certainly will be nature harming, human harming. So therefore, humanization of the scientist and an engineer, according to C.P. Snow, is very important. So out of the environmental movement or the interdisciplinary movement from 1950s to 60s, you have the introduction of literature, history, economics, sociology, anthropology into the dominant science technology institutions, first in America, then in Europe, then in India. So the outcome of the C.P. Snow debate on the two cultures is that bringing these two together. So in that process, the government have realized, so they have allowed the introduction of science, introduction of social sciences and literature into the dominant science and engineering institutions. IITs, for example, MITs, for example, and almost all, even polytechnic colleges in United States have disciplines from history, sociology, English, economics, all these disciplines as an extra but essential. So they have started engineering studies also. Engineering studies from a social history point of view. They have started literature in all the dominant science and engineering college. MIT is the first, of course. MIT's Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where world-renowned social scientist called Noam Chomsky. Noam Chomsky, you must have heard of him. Noam Chomsky is one of well-noted intellectuals in this world who has produced media studies, worked on media studies, and he worked on the American foreign policy. He's a great linguist, and he is from that MIT's Humanities and Social Sciences. And of course, always all IITs were also based on the MIT model, and they got introduced social sciences department, humanities and social science department were introduced into the all these IITs in this country. And of course, slowly many of the engineering and science institutions are also introducing. But compared to that of the Europe, India, the interaction between the scientists, engineers on one hand, social sciences and humanities on the other hand, is terribly low. They are a bit advanced America and Europe, but we still do not have a required engagement between the two cultures. So these two cultures, of course, as I mentioned, engineering, science on one side, humanities and social sciences on the other. The interaction between these two is quite terribly low in this country. That is not the case with Europe. They've realized it, and except in the IITs, we do not have much of an engagement between these two cultures in this country. Then, of course, the history of science and technology and environment started as part of the environmental movement, interdisciplinary movement in 1950s. Obviously, will have other functions to perform. What are those other functions? When you say history of science, history of technology, it does not it cannot be limiting itself to just study the engagement between the nature and the human, or how the technology was used by the humans for a period of time, which has created a serious problem. But also both science and technology are part of human culture, human history. So therefore, science and technology are also becomes as symbols for the history of each and every community, from different civilization, different continent, different nations, and within a nation from different, within the different communities, and so on and so forth. So science and technology is also supposed to focus on the race, question of race, question of cultural inequalities. Okay, so question of caste, question of women, all these areas also science and technology is supposed to cover. So when it comes to beginning of the science and technology, immediately the other perspectives, other agendas for science and technology began to evolve. First among them is that imperialism. While the Western society and America was focusing on the history of science and technology and some other themes like science and technology and race, science and technology and slavery, science and technology and capitalism, science and technology and philosophy. So all these things, the Western society and America was focusing on, but colonized society immediately took or started allocating its own functions to science and technology and environment. What are their functions? What are the agendas for colonized? They have to counter the colonized people. The historians, scientists from the colony have to write the histories of their science and technology in order to counter the narratives that are presented by the imperialist historians on their science and technology. Therefore, they started allocating their own functions to the history of science and technology. That is the historians from the colonies. That means the historians from the West, that is the Western Europe, the imperialist Europe, they also began to allocate functions, allocate agendas to history of science and technology. What are they doing? Historians of Western Europe or imperialist historians, they were trying to study how science and technology helped the imperialism, how science and technology brought development into the colonies, and how science and technology is not same across all civilizations. According to Deepak Kumar, the imperialist historiography on science trying to highlight the civilizational differences highlighting the differences, civilizational differences. By highlighting the civilizational differences, what Deepak Kumar was trying to point out, that the Europeans, the imperialist historians, are trying to say that science across the civilizations or across the cultures is not the same. Therefore, Europeans, in his gradation, in imperialist historians' gradation of the societies, grading the civilizations from the Western point of view or the European point of view, what is often called as Eurocentrism, that Europe is first in terms of its inventive culture, Asia is second, Africa is third. So the gradation of civilizations, grading of civilizations based on degree of science and technology that is existing in one culture is what Deepak Kumar is trying to counter. That is called anti-Eurocentrism. What Deepak Kumar is doing is anti-Eurocentrism. But Eurocentrism, the agenda of Eurocentric history of science and technology is to highlight the cultural differences in order to point out that compared to that of the European societies, non-European societies are scientifically, technologically are not equal. So it is the intention, it is the agenda of the imperialist historians. Apart from that, the imperialist historiography has also used science and technology studies on science and technology to glorify racial superiority. I was following point, of course, highlighting the cultural differences, as Deepak Kumar pointed out, is not just for the purpose of saying that you are not equal to me. Underlining agenda of such cultural, highlighting the cultural differences is also highlighting the cultural superiority or racial superiority. If George Bessela, who has argued in his small article for Spread of Western Science, argued that obviously the European civilization is much superior compared to the rest of the civilizations. So such a proposition, such an argument is certainly racial in nature. So therefore, the degree of knowledge that the Western society has cannot be compared with the degree of knowledge the Asian or the African society has in terms of science and technology. Therefore, they are not equal. So, when such kind of studies highlights the racial superiority of the Europe by studying the history of science and technology, historians from the colonies countered them and exposed the intentions of the imperialist historians and made their own arguments that I'll come to later. The imperialist historiography also justifies imperialism and colonialism. Imperialist historiography and science and technology also justifies imperialism as well as colonialism. What is justification of imperialism and colonialism? When science and technology are seen as tools of progress, when the science and technology are seen as liberating forces of human from the dangerous religious and social orthodoxy, then the European imperialist historians believe that they have the upper hand. You compare the pre-modern India and its systems of production, knowledge systems of production, and its science. Then you compare the Europe, 18th century or 19th century or 20th century, the systems of production and the degree of production, and the amount of scientific knowledge that is existing in the Western Europe. Obviously, there will be a feeling for you that certainly India is not equal to that of Western Europe. In terms of mechanization of production, the amount of technology, amount of engineering, and in terms of science, certainly India is like not equal. You will have to get that impression, obviously get that impression. So comparison is for that purpose only. However, when science and technology are seen as symbols of progress, they could be, but they are not, solely they are not, that we came to the realization after the understanding the crisis of civilization. But even if they are, is colonial government in India using science and technology as it is using in its Britain? In Britain, understand. So the colonial policy of the usage of science and technology in India and the way science and technology being promoted and used in Britain differs. Not the same way they are used. For example, trains in India were not used just for transportation of goods, but also to transport the force of control. Wherever the movement was taking place, anti-British movement was taking place, force of control, to transport the force of control, forces of control, trains were used. So the usage of the trains in India and Britain are not the same. So coloniality of technology, coloniality of governmentality of technology and science, this is where you need to be careful. So in Britain, science and technology will have less governmentality, less coloniality. In India, coloniality and governmentality for science and technology is much higher. Governmentality and coloniality is nothing but the government uses the tools in order to show its power, maintain its power on the subjects. Coloniality is nothing but a colonial government, a foreign government, try to put science and technology to the best usage possible so that it itself benefits, and also the forces which it is supporting in terms of exploiting India economically, they also benefit. So this is what is coloniality of science and technology in India. Governmentality of science and technology is in India nothing but using the science and technology as a tools of controlling the colonial subjects. So therefore, technology use it differently, science use it differently, of course nature use it differently. Nature, for example, in India, converting the natures of Africa, South America and Asia into the estate economies. It was not using its nature for that purpose. Britain was not using its nature for that purpose. Britain was using the nature of South America, Africa, Asia for converting the nature into the plantation economies, estate economies. So therefore, the usage of the coloniality of the government in India, colonial government in India, is such in terms of nature, is that it is not using the nature as it is using its nature in Britain, is it not? So therefore, this difference is what we need to understand. So the studies on history of science and technology and colonial and nature by the Indian historian would offer such analysis that what is the different usage of the colonial government, how the nature is being used, how science and technology is being employed in India. So what are its agendas? So the colonial government obviously used science and technology as tools of control and tools of exploitation. But at the same time, the historians of the West, imperialist historians, try to present science and technology as a tools of progress in the colonies. That means it is science and technology that is brought from the Western Europe, or in the case of India from the Britain especially, has resulted in developing India from that of the agricultural economy into the industrial economy. So therefore, it is progress. You cannot complain against the science and technology. How can you complain against science and technology? That is being brought and employed and used by the colonial government in India. So therefore, it tried to justify the existence of colonialism by referring to the development it brought in the colony by employing science and technology. So that is what is justification of colonialism. The imperialist historians try to present a picture that British science and technology in India was only for the benefit of Indians. Could be, maybe, Kay and Panikkar agreed that there are collateral benefits. That means, yes, science and technology of Western Europe in India has benefited India, but at what cost? What is the degree of exploitation? What is the degree of exploitation? That imperial historians do not tell you. That is what is biased history. So imperialist historians, science and technology studies on the colonies, the intention of theirs is that they have to highlight the superiority, racial superiority, and at the same time try to justify the colonialism and its existence in India, and they are biased. Indian historians do agree that yes, a model of development was introduced by the Britain, did benefit India. Yes, we agree, but you have to tell the other side of the picture also. It is used for the benefit of the empire. It is used for the benefit of the both science and technology, used for benefit of the colonial government. In fact, they are also used for the benefit of the merchants of Manchester. That is the British business community. So one has to highlight that also. Both pictures you have to provide. But the imperialist historians on science and technology and nature does not highlight the picture of exploitation. They only highlight the picture of the racial superiority. How good is the British government to the Indians in introducing science and technology, which are tools of progress? How India has put the Indians out of the poverty by introducing the mechanized methods of production. How British has helped the Indians to build the institutions of science, institutions of technology, institutions of studying nature, modern systems of administration, modern revenue, and so on and so forth. It tried to highlight all those things. But in those structures and systems, there are two sides. Okay? An organized exploitation of India, and also collateral benefit, as K. N. Panikkar agreed that yes, there is some benefit, we don't deny, but it is a responsibility of the imperialist historian to highlight the both sides. Since they don't do it, it is the responsibility of the historian of colony to study the history of science and technology from the nationalist point of view to counter the Eurocentric perspectives or Eurocentric understanding of India. It is only their responsibility to counter it. Because it is obvious that the imperialist historians do not tell you how the British government exploited India by using science and technology as the tools of exploitation. So therefore, they will have to, the responsibility has to fall on the shoulders of the historians of colonies, all colonies, not only British colonies, all colonies, Indonesia, Indochina, Africa, South America. So all these historians, of course, came together in order to counter what the imperialist historians doing, against what they're doing, and how they're writing the histories of science and technology of the colonies. So the anti-Eurocentric studies also have emerged in the later stages. Of course, not too late, but immediately, of course, 1960s and 70s, immediately they also started. If someone is trying to, say, a historian from India is trying to study the history of science and technology, he or she cannot ignore that the British government has misused science and technology for its benefits. So therefore, anti-Eurocentric narratives are immediately will come once one started looking into the history of science and technology. You don't need to take much time. So Nistads, historians from Nistads immediately began to look into the history of science and technology from the Indian point of view, and they began to counter the imperialist historians' narratives like George Basella, Daniel H. Hendricks. All are trying to present colonial science and technology is a good thing for India. So looks like it is 11:27 or something. Yeah, so it's almost 11:30. I'll speak for 1 minute and I'll close. So it's obviously the responsibility of the historians from the colonies to counter the Eurocentric perspectives, Eurocentric narratives on history of colonies. But this anti-Eurocentrism that we are talking is not limited to one colony. Again, it is a joint academic exercise. It's a joint academic exercise where by nature most of the historians from the colonies join together. There are historians from India, historians from Sri Lanka, historians from Africa, historians from Brazil. All of them have joined together in order to build a joint academic encounter or a counter called anti-Eurocentrism. In that, you have also British historians as well as American historians who have joined the anti-Eurocentrism movement. So this is to say that not all the British historians are not all American historians are imperialist in nature. There are also historians who try to work on Asia from the Asian point of view, from the colony point of view, and they try to join the anti-Eurocentric movement, academic movement. So across all European societies, European countries, there are historians, sociologists who believe that what the imperialist historians did is wrong. So therefore they themselves seriously working, joined with the historians of colonies to counter the imperialist narratives or Eurocentric narratives on the colonies. I'll stop here. We'll join after the tea break.
Thank you, sir. We will meet again.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Very informative.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, 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 sir.
Sir.
Ah.
லைப்ரரி எதுக்கு என்ன யூஸ் பண்ண போற? புக்கில் எடுக்க முடியாது. லைப்ரரி க்ளோசிங். லைப்ரரி இன்சார்ஜ் அவங்க வரணும், அவங்க தானே.
Okay. I hope all mics are muted.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we were talking about Eurocentrism and anti-Eurocentrism. Justification of justification of colonialism, and also the tools of science and technology as the tools of modernization. This is of a different part of it, justification of colonialism. But the project of modernization is it applies to culture, social aspects, as well as systems of production, systems of government, governance, and so on and so forth. But however, the project of modernity is a much discussed and debated project in terms of its impact or the kind of pressure it put on the Indian socio-religious and cultural systems. So from that angle, the British would believe that the scientific modernity, to a large extent, Indians also agrees to it, but there are some oppositions after the post-modernity. Anyway, so colonial historians or the imperialist historians argue that British government or the British colonialism gave you a scientific modernity. Scientific modernity is having two strands. One is the actual science that you use for production, and another strand is scientific philosophy or rationalism, science-based rationalism, that is a tool that scrutinizes cultures. It questions the illogicities, illogicalities, irrationalities inbuilt in the cultures. From that point of view, scientific rationalism across the cultures, be it British, be it Africa, be it South America, and be it India, be it Asia, the ability of scientific rationality to question the illogicalities inbuilt in culture specific to the societies acquired certain amount of universality. So that universality to a large extent is appreciated by the cultures and society people across the societies. However, the glorification of scientific modernity was not, accepted by the historians of different perspectives, not colonial historians per se, but historians of colonies per se, but historians across all sections and all societies and all cultures have agreed to some large extent that scientific rationality is having certain amount of ability and capacity to scrutinize the cultures, and to the scrutinization of the culture is actually for providing the democracy and equality to all sections of the particular society. Cultural variations, culture of a particular society is torturous to some, and it will be comfortable to some, it will be prestige for some, it will be pain for some. So a culture that is painful to some, if it is put through the scientific scrutiny, then that can be removed. Okay, it's a culture, some it is discriminatory. Culture of some particular society is discriminatory to some sections of the same society, could be put through the scientific scrutiny, and that could be removed. Anyway, so point is the project of modernity sponsored by the Britain in India was also a project that is used by the imperialist historians to glorify or to highlight the positivity of the Western civilization compared to that of the Indian civilization. or the civilizational inadequacies in the Indian civilization. The positivity and civilizational inadequacies. So to highlight that differences, cultural studies on science, or modernity, studies on scientific modernity in India have focused on that area, where they have to highlight the cultural variations between Britain and India, and to what extent they are democratic, what extent they are rational, what extent they are irrational, what extent they are orthodox. So all these questions are asked. So practically the cultures were put to the pressure of the scientific rationalism, and of course they are reformed. Scientific rationalism, not scientific rationalism alone, but also humanism was used in order to put these all the cultures, unequal or cultures that are discriminatory. All these cultures were put to the scientific scrutiny, and the British tried to highlight those cultures, those differences, and they say that scientific modernity did help India in trying to reform its culture to present itself as a culture that can be appreciated by the rest of the society. So cultural inadequacies need to be questioned. So British believed that its scientific rationality, humanism, did question the cultural irrationalities, cultural inadequacies existing in India. So therefore, they use science technology to highlight that also as part of the imperialist historiography. Then 20th century, we are talking about history writing, and 21st century. We are talking about history writing in 20th century, 21st century. Especially 20th century, second half of 20th century, that is from 1950s. 1950s. So this time, 1950s, is different from the rest of the time compared to that of its consciousness. The society's consciousness on knowledge, society's consciousness on history, society's consciousness on identities, society's consciousness on who they are, what they should be. This consciousness across all civilizations in the second half of 20th century is, compared to the earlier times, is much higher. That means the allied social forces of pre-1950s, which had the power and monopoly over history writing or on the historiography, cannot continue to have such kind of power and monopoly over historiography. If Indian historians are writing anti-Eurocentric history or anti-colonial history, that means Indian historians have acquired the ability or got the independence of writing their own history, not depending upon the or not looking for the permission of the British historians or imperialist historians. So therefore, the historical consciousness of the Indian historians, allowing them to produce counter narratives to the imperialist historiography. So the historical consciousness of 20th century and 21st century cannot be limited to the social elite called British European elite. It also be to be applied to the Indian elite. Indian, the minuscule majority, that is Indian historians, the minuscule majority consisting of primarily Brahmins and upper class from the different about the castes above the Sudras, consisting from belonging to these three castes in this country. Of course, from the other religious communities also, Christians and Muslims. But elite historians in this country are a minuscule minority. There is no doubt about it. But among that minuscule minority, Brahmin minority is dominating the historiography. That is also will be challenged in the 21st century and the latter part of the 20th century. That is from 1970s onwards and the 21st century. So the monopoly over the historiography, control over the historiography would be challenged by the first from the historians of colony against the historians of empire, imperialist historians. So they would claim their right to write the history from their own perspective. They produce narratives that counters the imperialist historical narratives on science and technology. So that is the first response to the domination over historiography or history. And as I told you, that goes down line, but not at the same time. It did not happen. So the beginning was made. First, historiography is liberated from the imperialist. Liberated in the sense is not totally controlled but dominated. That's in that sense I'm using the word liberation. Indian historians are there from of course from the beginning of 20th century. So that does not mean that history writing is being controlled by the empire, but the degree of freedom to write the history of India and the emergence of historian also from the colony took some time. Okay, so therefore, by the second half of 20th century, or of course in the first half of 20th century, the beginning of 20th century, you have historians from India who are trying to declare independence from the monopoly or dominance of historiography by the imperialist historians, and they would produce the counter narratives on the history of against the Eurocentric historicism. Then that goes down to the line where the Indian elite monopoly over the historiography questioned by the rest of the communities within India. So there could be Muslims, there could be Christians, there could be Dalits, there could be women, there could be Adivasis. All of them are becoming conscious of their historicity. Historical consciousness for them is also trying to allow them to write their own histories. But point is that elite historians in this country, a minuscule minority, is certainly still controlling, if not dominating, or it does not have monopoly over historiography or history, but still controlling histories, writing of histories. There is no doubt about it. What is its how it manages to control histories is another debate. Here I don't want to get into that. But however, the deletion of Mahaswata Devi text and Bhama text from English literature in Delhi is one such an example. It's openly done. One such an example of how histories of the Dalit and women or Adivasis are becoming uncomfortable to the nation. So because their histories of Adivasi is certainly a painful history, a suffering history, and that history becomes unwanted, insignificant, problematic. So therefore, that history is being controlled. So this recent thing can be pointed out, or as an example, how elite history still controls Indian historiography. So anyway, so second half of 20th century and the first half of 21st century, where we are in, is a time where historical consciousness cannot be controlled. But history writing can be controlled. Historical consciousness cannot be controlled. These are two different things. Historical consciousness is understanding who you are, what your history is at individual level, at group level, at national level, at regional level, at community level, and at national level. This cannot be stopped by anybody because it is this time called 21st century. Controlling knowledge is impossible. Flow of information is impossible. So therefore, then the same flow of information, the creation or the production of multiple histories, production of multiple histories also increases the historical consciousness. Earlier, a person who do not know, or a member, part of a community do not know what his or his own history. But now though history is written, so they would become conscious of who they are, what they are. Once you historically become conscious, you will be looking for building your own identity. That is also obvious. So out of that concern, when the historical consciousness about the nation began to increase in its degree in India during the freedom struggle, British could not control the history writing by the Indian historians. Radhabhai Navrodi, Ramesh Chandra Dutt, Krishna Prasad Jaiswal, all of them are started writing the history of India from the nationalist point of view. Some of K.P. Jaiswal is difficult to locate him in the nationalist historiography. He belongs to a sort of a communal historiography, not nationalist historiography. But however, nationalist historiography was emerging, and it is obviously creates discomfort to the British. So later, when the science and technology studies have emerged, anti-Eurocentrism certainly creating discomfort to the British and their narratives, but it cannot be stopped because the degree of historical consciousness among Indians during the freedom struggle gradually increased, and after the freedom struggle, they were building the nation, a fresh nation. So therefore, that nation should have a good identity, a powerful identity, culturally, historically. It should have a proper identity. So therefore, the history of India that was written by the British need to be counted, and a fresh history need to be written. So therefore, Jawaharlal Nehru's discovery of India would present the agenda to the historians of independent India. So if you look at scientific and technological aspects in discovery of India, you would see that Nehru was neither glorifying ancient Indian science and technology nor rejecting it, neither totally denying Western science and technology nor glorifying it, neither taking India into consideration that the deep orthodoxy, deep religious orthodoxy, deep cultural orthodoxy that was there in the pre-colonial India he was not taking that India as it is into the 1950s. He was scrutinizing in his writing in Discovery of India. He was presenting scientific temper as a suitable philosophy for the nation. He was presenting the modern large-scale technological systems as a suitable model of production. He was arguing that the socio-religious scrutinization of culture and society is very important, and scientific rationalism need to be applied in that. So therefore, this is a conscious project of modernity by Jawaharlal Nehru in his discovery of India, what India need to be. So the same agenda is followed by the historians of India who are producing counter narratives to the British historiography. So historians of India on science and technology neither rejecting nor glorifying. Neither rejecting nor glorifying. That means if you, when it comes to history of India, science and technology of history of India, Claude Alvarez, one of the, especially he's a historian of, is a sociologist of science and technology. He has, to counter the Eurocentric argument, he has written a book called Homo Faber, Science Technology in India, China and West from 1500. His main argument in that book is that Homo Faber is a word or a concept that refers to worker. Human is a worker across every civilization or across every culture, every society. Therefore, the degree of science and technology depends upon what you need, what is essential for the human survival. So if a worker produces certain amount of techniques, a certain amount of ideas in a particular culture that is specific to him or her, that specific science and technology in that particular culture is limited by the human needs and essentialities. So therefore, that is one thing. Second is that if the human is a worker and such a human across the society would produce his or her own techniques and ideas. So therefore, every human is a worker in Europe and Asia and anywhere in the world. So therefore, every human would produce certain amount of technology. So you cannot make an argument that the Indian society is less technologically advanced or less scientific. When you make those arguments, you have to look at what kind of society it is and how it evolved in course of time, what was its needs and what was its essentialities. So in that case, you will be able to understand that the degree of knowledge that is existing is determined the degree of development and essentialities of particular society. So the human, the European society's needs cannot be, could be compared with itself only. You cannot be comparing the European society's needs with that of the other society. So it is the needs which determines the degree of invention and development and generation of ideas. So Claude Alvarez makes that point, saying that human is worker everywhere. So is the degree of knowledge or degree of development, degree of inventive traditions and so forth. So therefore, a common comparative analysis is impossible. And when you compare the societies, grade the societies based on the knowledge, you have to take the cultural specificity, social specificity into the account. So therefore, another argument he makes that everywhere human is intelligent. He or she produces means and mechanisms according to the problems he or she faces. So therefore, you cannot dismiss some society as non-technical, some society as non-scientific. Okay, this is what Claude Alvarez says. So same argument is taken into consideration by the nationalist historians on science and technology. They argued that Indian science and technology over course of time is according to its necessities. It's not that there's nothing, but there's something, and that is required by its society. Okay, so those arguments they made, and they try to use those arguments to counter the Eurocentric historicism. So, but Indian historiography in its project of anti-Eurocentrism, it has science, technology as tools of exploitation and also scientific modernity as a project of reforming India. In that, in these aspects, also Indian historians try to produce narratives, and psychologically, Deepak Kumar also argues that British government has tried to impose its culture, quote unquote, superior culture, to mummify Indians, psychologically try to work on the brains of Indians, saying that when they're trying to highlight the cultural differences, so one would get the feeling that they're inferior compared to that of the Europeans, scientifically, technologically. So therefore, automatically you attribute the inventiveness or inventive superiority to the Europeans, and you consider them yourself as a secondary citizen in terms of science and technology. So Deepak Kumar argues that British used the clever strategy of mummifying Indians by highlighting the cultural differences. That means they worked on the mind psychologically to highlight the cultural differences, to make them feel inferior compared to the Europeans. So thus, European anti-Eurocentrism has adapted this strategy of countering the empire with highlighting or exposing its exploitative character. First objective of nationalist historiography is exposing the exploitative character of the empire by studying the history of science and technology, and at the same time it also exposes the racial character of the empire. And at the same time, of course, as I told you, K.N. Panikkar agreed that the Western science and technology did impact India positively, which he called as collateral benefits. So out of some damage, there will be some benefit. So he called it as collateral benefits. So, but this presenting the culture of the empire as a prime culture is not limited to the empire alone, but is also equally there in the upper caste culture in India. So it tried to present its culture as a prime culture. The rest of the communities are supposed to be the secondary citizens or the constituent parts, which are just either be there or they are there. That's it. But my culture is important, and obviously, the culture of the social elite becomes the culture of the nation. So it's not just a character of the empire, but it's also a character of the social elite in the country once it gained independence. So it is quite natural that once the nations have emerged, every social majority would try to present its culture as a culture of the nation, and it wants that culture to be considered as such. Even if it is a multicultural society, same is the case with India. Though the history of science and technology, from the point of history of science and technology, the trio subjects, astronomy, medicine, and mathematics of ancient India were never dismissed, and both by the Western Europeans and the Indian Europeans, their due is respected. They're respected as they are. To the extent they are real, yet the glorification of India and that actually was taken up, and that project is actually basing itself on highlighting the culture of one single community. So that is being presented as a nation, culture of the nation, is where the problem is. Otherwise, I don't think the nationalist historiography was actually making any mistakes. They are following the Nehru's project of modern India. So Nehru's project of modern India is a project that presents India as a rationalist society, as a less caste society, as a society that respects science and technology, and not just in speaking, but is also in practice. So therefore, his prioritization of science and technology as the tools of progress in India is case in point. But however, there are problems with that. We're not going into details of that. So therefore, the politics of historiography is very important. It's the monopoly of historiography started with elitist imperial. Then the same is adopted by the Indian elite, and against that, the rest of the people were trying to claim their own due in trying to produce narratives of it, their own history. So therefore, multiple histories of science and technology within India from different perspectives, from the perspectives of Adivasi, from the perspectives of Dalits, and from the perspectives of women, from the perspectives of nation, of course, from the perspectives of Marxists and so on and so forth, will be natural in a society that challenged the monopoly of historiography. So monopoly is dangerous. So monopoly did not continue for a long time because historical consciousness has contributed to challenge the historiographical monopoly. In India, the historical consciousness is fast spreading from 1950s onwards. So of course there are so many communities in this country who are still remain as non-historical categories. They are not even having their own identity card even today. There are nomadic tribes who do not have a document to prove who they are, where they belongs to. So there are many non-historical categories in this country. They are physically existing, but they do not have documents to prove who they are. So that apart, they do have some amount of inventive culture. As Claude Alvarez argued, every human is capable of creating something. So creativity does not belong to one race, one community, one caste, one gender. Okay, so the creativity depends upon what you need, what you don't need. That's it. So that is the simple logic of the Homo faber theory of Claude Alvarez. So the Eurocentrism is a combined social science project that is taken up by the historians from the colonies to counter the imperialist historiography, and at the same time the subaltern historiography is a combined social science project to counter the monopoly of the elitist historiography in the country, and so things goes like that. But as I pointed out, unfortunately, till the social elite in this country has the ability of controlling and dismissing, because it develops certain parameters. Those parameters are used to determine what is history, what is not history, and they have the power of determining it. Not everybody having it. That is the serious problem. So national historiography, as I told you, it has agendas. It goes to the extent of it explores the possibility of scientific technological hybridity. Nationalist historiography, in the process of countering the Eurocentric historiography, it tried to present a picture, present a possibility of a Indian science. This is very clear from the Swadeshi movement. Swadeshi movement in 1905 is actually a movement that is exploring the Indian science, quote unquote. So which means by 1905, Indian leadership came to the understanding Indian science and technology as such is either ignored or damaged, destroyed, or dismissed. So therefore, in 1905, what is happening? Out of the desperation to create the systems of production of India was trying to generate its own, recreate its own technology, revive its own technology, and also that applies same to the science. Society for the Cultivation of Indian Science in Bengal in 1860s around. That's the same kind of an effort or attempt by the scientists of India to revive the Indian science. But however, here you have to, when you look at the Indian science and technology, there are two broad categories. One is classical science, another is subaltern technology. So classical science and subaltern technology. So these are two broad categories. So what was happening with the Bengal's Institute of Cultivation of Science, National Institute for Cultivation of Science, is actually an effort to revive the classical science. But it is not purely classical science again, that they're trying to adopt Western science, and out of that they were also trying to, using certain principles of Western science, they were trying to rebuild, revive, and there is a certain amount of hybridity, possibility of hybridity for creating the Indian version of science and technology. Then from 1905 onwards, there is effort to revive Indian science and Indian technology, especially because the anti-partition of Bengal movement was also turned out to be Swadeshi movement, where it was its main aim at that point in time, that because anti-partition of Bengal also brought in the opposition of foreign goods. So if you oppose the foreign goods, you have to produce your own. So out of the desperation of producing your own, reviving your own is also becomes essential. So, but however, reviving your own, what is the possibility of reviving your own? To what extent your own can be revived? So, but then the another question is, reviving your own, can it be presented as it is to the context? Is suitable to the context? Indian, the pre-modern systems of production, especially in terms of technology, their viability is become a serious question. Viability means the degree of production. The degree of production, the pace of production. The pre-modern science and technology in India, especially technology in India, was non-mechanical. So therefore, when you compare the non-mechanical with the mechanical, what kind of an impression you would get? Certainly, you think that compared to the in terms of economic viability and the pace of production, the pre-modern Indian systems of production may not be equal. So therefore, there was an effort in 1905 to create certain amount of hybridity. You borrow some from some Western and you borrow some Indian in certain cases and try to revive it and try to produce a hybrid technological model, West and East together. Sometimes if the technology cannot be compromised, technology need to be brought in as it is, at least the capital is Indian, engineers are Indian, mechanics are Indian, maintainers are Indian, labor are Indian, material is Indian, only technology is Western. It doesn't matter. So at least you are producing. So such kind of technological, it cannot be called as technological hybridity, but however, it is hybrid in a sense that Indian version of technology was need to be created. So it questions the domination of the Western technology on one hand, and it also explored the historiography of science and technology in India during the colonial times, and after that also try to explore the possibility of technological hybridity started in 1905 during the Swadeshi movement. And of course this Swaraj, Gandhi's text is also one of the serious texts on exploring the possibility of reviving Indian systems of production. That is also very important. So apart from that, it also tried to build the modernity on its own, but this project, this historiographical project of building its modernity, emerged out of the too much of domination of the Western science on the rest of the world, where Western science, of course, postmodernism is such emergence, emerged out of that concern only. Scientific rationalism is dominating the rest of the cultures. The postmodernists argues that every culture has certain amount of rationality, and Western European scientific rationalism cannot become universal. So you have to consider the rational pluralism or plural rationalities. That means every society has certain amount of humanism, certain amount of thinking. They do have their own minds. So therefore, how can scientific rationalism of West can be only one suitable model for the entire world? So therefore, they try to bring in, develop their own scientific rationalism or rationalist project. The historians from the non-European society, but so anywhere it is actually basic foundations of scientific rationalism is that it has to respect the logical thinking, rationalism inbuilt in the philosophy. But Indians, though made efforts to criticize the modern sciences, torture, pain, rationalism's pain and suffering. Yes, there is. Modern science has caused a lot of pain and suffering to the rest of the societies. Even to the Western society also, it has caused pain and suffering. Bodies, for example, medicine, it has caused too much of pain. Military technology, it has caused too much of suffering and pain. So this is all out of modern science and technology. Therefore, modern science and technology cannot be taken as it is without any criticism. So it needs to be controlled. So in the beginning, I have spoken like that. So of course, crisis of civilization is that we are referring to. So military technology is a biggest threat to the world, and that there is no doubt about it. Corporate technology is a bigger threat to the world, that there is no doubt about it. So therefore, the modern medicine, apart from liberating human from the pain and suffering, it has gone to the extent of causing pain and suffering, because it doesn't stop at any point. It continues to exploit the human intention, human emotions, and human sensibilities. It goes to the extent of investigating into every body, cutting every body, using every body for the experiment, and so on and so forth. And in the process of development, it does not care about the existence of the humans. Let the humans die, but development should go. Such kind of a strategy that is very well exposed by the Narmada Bachao Andolans movement by the Madhav Patkar, certainly called the science and technology into the discussion and debate and scrutiny. So such an attitude is there in that. So therefore, the Indians try to highlight the domination of the Western science, point out the problems of Western science, especially large scale and small scale. That's how the debate called large scale and small scale came into. Gandhian alternatives was presented as an alternative to the Western science, large scale science and technology, because something large is actually creating problems. So decentralization of the development, a debate that came into existence while opposing the big dams like Sardar Sarovar project by Madhav Patkar. So she has called for the decentralization of development, and that decentralization of development also means the decentralization of bigger structures into smaller. Decentralization of development in terms of science and technology is also calls for not administration or not sharing the fruits of development or the power, but also the structures. Structures need to be decentralized, and in place of smaller structures, bigger structures, smaller structures have to come in. So Indian historiography on science and technology countered the European science and technology from that angle, and also it has focused on highlighting the real science and technology that is existing in the Indian society. As I told you, I refer to the trio sciences in ancient India: astronomy, medicine, and mathematics. That due respect is given, and at the same time, wherever the science and technology was real and it is historical, quote unquote, I am using the word very carefully, historical, and it is scientific, quote unquote, and it is technological, quote unquote, and it is recognized by the Indian historians as such, European historians as such. So there is no denial of the real Indian science and technological heritage, no matter where it comes from. But when the Indian historiography gone beyond control, the ahistorical narratives of science and technology came into existence. But in proposing the scientific modernity, India also could not be successful in a sense that it tried to present its modernity project on again on the Western modernity, and it has metaphysical philosophy which is equal to that of materialist philosophy. For example, Charvaka philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, they could be borrowed into building the modernity project of India, but the Indian society in trying to build its own version of modernity did not care to borrow them into the building of the philosophies. So the Indian historiography did not focus much on that. So Indian historians of science and technology have only focused on certain areas in an effort to build the counter narratives like alternative technologies, alternative science, criticizing modern science for its pain and suffering, torture, all these things, and highlighting the exploitative nature of the empire and the racial character of the empire. So all these things were taken into consideration, but it did not go beyond the point of being inclusive in taking the knowledge systems of other into its project. The subaltern historiography of science and technology, I think we have few minutes to speak, is that, as I told you, that everybody is historically consciousness. Not only the elite in this country have science, technology. Almost all communities in this country have science and technology, according to the theory of Homo faber by Claude Alvarez. If that is the case, Dalits have and Sudras have their own science and technology, which is not from the project of the Indian science and technology. Especially mostly in the initial stages, Indian science and technology glorified the ancient science and technology. Rest it did not take into the consideration, because it is obvious that the inventive culture of the Sudras and the Ati Sudras or the Dalits is not considered as knowledge at all. Though they are the producing communities, yet their knowledge, the inventive culture, is not considered as knowledge. So that is stayed as such for a long time. So the subaltern history of science and technology counters the elitist science and technology, elitist historiographical bias, and it tried to produce its own narratives in trying to highlight its inventive culture. For example, in subaltern historiography, recently, though it is only recently picking up at focusing on the inventive culture of the Sudras and Ati Sudras, that is the OBCs, BCs, as the agricultural community and industrial community, and so on and so forth, only recently taking up. But as far as the modernization project is concerned, the subaltern narratives or subaltern historiography says counters the postmodernist historiography. Postmodernism in India and the elitist Indian historiography in India One tried to highlight the classical culture, science of classical classical culture. That is India's culture that belongs to the minuscule minority. But when it comes to India, we always try to attribute inventive culture to the minuscule minority in this country. That is done by historians of India, and at the same time, their focus was on countering anti-empire narratives, but they did not focus much onto the working communities, working class communities, or working caste communities. In other words, if you say Sudras are working caste, the Adisudras are working caste, and also you can use the word class. But the inventive culture of these castes or class is very minimal. The histories on them is very minimal. The Indian historiography did not focus much. Only recently focuses some handful of historians are focusing on it. But a main thing that is happening is that countering the postmodernist dismissal of scientific modernity. Problem with the postmodernist dismissal of scientific modernity is that postmodernists argue scientific rationalism is dominating monopoly. It does not consider the other cultures. Okay, does not consider rationalism or cultural positivity of other cultures. So it tried to create singular culture for entire world. Despite being dominant, despite being torturous, despite being biased, the Western scientific modernity is not allowing the other cultural pluralities to grow or to be recognized. So out of this argument, postmodernists, what they're doing, they're also trying to romanticize the illogicities, illogicalities, irrationalities once they were dismissed, and they were trying to reinvite them into, re-highlight the cultural specificities or cultural positivities. So in India, Ashish Nandi tried to say that India has its own rationalism. Western modernity cannot be presented as one single modernism. But then may be true, but if you do not limit that the criticism to the bad science or dominant science, and if you try to apply that to the scientific rationality is different from science. So what is scientific rationality? Scientific rationality is a philosophy that questions the illogicalities, illogicities in cultures. So if you do not allow that to perform its functions, then the societies will continue to be socially orthodox, culturally orthodox, and they will be discriminative, and they will be tortured to the people, the many communities in this country. For example, if Dalits, if women, the culture on which women, culture by which woman is being governed, woman life is being governed, culture by which Dalits life is being governed, if it is not put to the scientific scrutiny, rationalization, then they will continue to face the problems. But the postmodernist does not care about it. The scientific modernity is dominant, Western, so you don't have to worry. But the historians from the subaltern communities says that stop. Don't dismiss scientific rationality yet. It did not do its job. Indian science, Indian society, Indian culture, Indian social norms are not yet scrutinized, not properly scrutinized. So before scientific modernity performing its functions, arguing for its dismissal is unfair. So this argumentation is put by Meerananda, an Ambedkarite scholar who is working on science. So she argued that scientific modernity is essential for women. Scientific modernity is essential for Dalits. Scientific modernity is essential for Adivasis. They are still suffering from the pre-modern culture in India. culture and social norms, they're still suffering. So to avoid their sufferings, to avoid their pain, you need to allow the scientific modernity to scrutinize the Indian culture and social norms. Before doing it, you cannot dismiss because science became painful and suffering. Yes, if science became painful and suffering, that part of it need to be questioned and scrutinized. You cannot dismiss entire rationalism as something that is anti-Indian or something. So therefore, if there are some rationalities, if you wanted to invite, you are welcome, but not the rationalities that are not the culture that is dangerous, are declared to be dangerous, realized to be dangerous, dismissed to be dangerous long back ago, cannot be re-invited to rebuild the so-called Indian modernity in an effort to oppose the scientific modernity of the West. Yes, true. So therefore, the Mirananda tried to question the postmodernist thinking, who are trying to dismiss Western modern scientific rationalism as unsuitable or torturous, dangerous, violent. Yes, it is, but that part you need to address. But that does not mean that you do not continue to scrutinize the irrational and illogical cultures from which women, Dalits, and Adivasis are still suffering. I'll stop here. We can have discussion.
Participant,
Yes.
you may with Dr. Rao.
We had a highly interesting question. Kindly mention the science and technology subaltern historiography in India. Kindly mention the science and technology subaltern historiography in India.
Yes, science. As I mentioned, all communities which are involved in production comes under the broader category of subaltern communities. To be clear or to be precise, the Sudras, all of the Sudras. So today there are some who became upper caste, but they were once Sudras. My broader lens of Sudras are subalterns or producing communities. Now, if you look at the weaving community, they are comes under Sudra. They have inventive culture. So there are texts on oil milling. Nazir Tabji worked on oil milling. So there he has there is critical of trying to dominate the indigenous oil milling, totally dismissing indigenous oil milling systems and try to produce replace the indigenous with that of totally modern. So he presents a picture. Nasir Tabji, he worked on oil mills and colonialism, and of course, David Arnold from Warwick University recently focused on the everyday technologies. So everyday technologies, though he has not used the word subaltern, but the entire book on everyday technologies is about the histories of subalterns, inventive cultures of subalterns. So therefore, the David Arnold's everyday technologies is a complete text on subaltern technology. Of course, my student Prem Kumar is in the group. He is working on Alfred Chatterton, who has focused on modernization or reviving of the traditional technologies, indigenous technologies. So Alfred Chatterton has primarily focused on reviving the indigenous technologies, but what is the politics of that revival will come into the picture. But of course, it is true that British government wanted every inventive technique or any technology, even if it is indigenous, could be properly used for producing more for the benefit of the empire. So out of that, probably Britain was trying to modernize. So David Arnold's book, Everyday Technology, Nasir Tabsi, and Gandhi's text on text Swaraj, if you read that, also provides it, because he was Gandhi was saying like village technologies are very important, but only problem with the Gandhi is that it does not talk about what if village technologies are revived, what will happen to the caste. The caste nature of the village technologies he was not talking about. See, point is, any technology you try to present as a suitable technology today, today's society, first of all, it has to be decastized. Caste need to be removed. Caste tag need to be removed. Second, it need to be democratized. Okay, so if the revival of village technology is also revival of casteism, that is dangerous. So Gandhi was not focusing on that. He was trying to revive, say, because it is anti, no, it is very beautiful, small. Yeah, fine, it is beautiful, small. And they are adaptable. They need to be adapted. And of course, everybody likes that. Less dangerous technologies, less damaging technologies would be liked by many people. But what about the social dangers involved in that? So the structure of the caste need to be dismantled in order to present a technology that was existing in the pre-modern times as a suitable technology to the today's society. That Gandhi did not do much of work.
Thank you, sir,
Yeah.
for enlightening us.
Sir?
Yes.
Sir Rao, sir, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Thank you for your informative and very elaborate discussion in your topic. I have a question. You discussed elaborately before the tea break about anti-Eurocentrism, according to Deepak Kumar, and Eurocentrism. In this context, I think it is very necessary to discuss the concept of Asiatic mode of production of Karl Marx. What is your opinion in this so-called Asiatic mode of production?
Yes,
this context.
Yeah. Asiatic mode of production, of course, B. Kosambi himself rejects the Karl Marx analysis of Asia and the West in terms of production. Asiatic mode of production, of course, according to Karl Marx, is not having enough capacity to bring large-scale changes. That everyone agrees, but it cannot be said that, as far as the society is concerned, the change that is needed for the society will determine the level of development in techniques and techniques of production. So therefore, Karl Marx analysis of Asiatic mode of production could not bring much of a change, because they do not have the capacity of bringing the large-scale changes. According to D.D. Kosambi, that yes, society is changing. He refuses to agree with Karl Marx and says society is changing, but the change is according to the society's needs. It need not have to be large scale. So the same kind of an argument can be accepted, but in the Asiatic mode of production, for my understanding, is that it according to the Marx analysis, that it did not have the capacity of bringing the large-scale changes, which because if it had certain kind of capacity, such kind of a capacity, it could have brought changes in the caste system, and it could have reversed the social positions, but it did not do, and it did not have that capacity. So, but we cannot agree that society was not changing. Society was changing. Marx said society remaining constant because of lack of pace in the development. But Kosambi said, no, society is changing, but only at a lesser pace, because that change is enough for the society. But however, my understanding is that change was not enough for the society, because that change was not bringing any dramatic changes in the caste society. Hierarchies could not be changed with the Indian Asiatic mode of production, especially Indian context. I would say only Western mode of production offered such an opportunity for the dismantling of hierarchies, caste hierarchies in India. Western mode of production, that is the factory mode of production, only has offered certain opportunity. Asiatic mode of production, for my understanding, never had the capacity of altering the societal hierarchies.
Yes, yes, thank you. Fine. And so, can we treat this concept is Eurocentric approach?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, okay. Thank you, sir.
Yes.
So, good afternoon, sir. This is Biju, sir. So, thank you for your presentation, sir. Sir, I'm having a problem with the statements. For example, what do you think about that elitist historiography or the minuscule historiography? Do you think that simply the historians are from the non-Shudras be termed as historians, or from the works they have written? Based on that, you are telling that they are minuscule historians or elitist historians.
Yeah, it is historiography. Elitism is not the word that I have used. It is used by Ranjit Guha. And I also agree with him, saying that elitist historiography, I am not limiting to one social community. I said it is combination of class and caste. Also the historians from Muslims, historians from Christians, but they are from a class, religious community. So when they involve into that, historiography, when they become the members of elitist, it can be called as elitist. You cannot call it as a historians of a minuscule social minority. But the truth is that minuscule minority has been dominating the Indian historiography for long. There is no doubt about it. If there is a counter, then we need to provide some certain evidence on that. As I said, that I have also included historians from Muslims, Christians. So it is a class category, not a caste category. But out of that, there is also a caste category. So if you try to see within the participant historians of the elitist historiography, who are dominating the elitist historiography, if you ask a further question on that, certainly it will be historians from the minuscule social minority. There is no doubt about it.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you entirely dismiss that the role of capitalism in the growth of modern day science and technology, sir? Can you entirely dismiss that?
What?
Can you entirely dismiss the role of capitalism or the contribution of capitalism towards the growth and development of modern science and technology?
Yes, capitalism, it is not the question of dismissing the role of capitalism. Pointing out how capitalism is irresponsible. Role of positivity, negativity, both are there. It refused to consider the problems side by side existing or continuously growing in the process of accumulation of wealth. Capitalists do not care about it. Even if you point out that say this is the damage done, this is what is happening, so what? Do you want me to stop the development? No, certainly that is not the case. So capitalism was unscrutinized or uncriticized for a long time, and today you cannot go without criticizing capitalism, because its intentions are such that it does not care about what is happening to the planet or the humans. All that wants is capital accumulation. So today, tomorrow, they can leave entire community in the planet, and if the planet in the danger of getting danger of being unsuitable to the humans, they can go into the sky. That's what the Jeff Bezos is doing, and so they are trying to go into the space and make colonies for themselves. So capitalism has the capacity. That is also minuscule minority. They themselves can go to the space somewhere to the Mars, and they can start a new life. But they don't care about the rest of the planet and rest of the humans. So that is what I criticize. It is not that it did not play an important role.
Thank you, sir. My last observation or question, sir. Why the Jews are dominating the knowledge domain, sir, whether in humanities or in science and technology? Is there any decodings of their genome study regarding this Jews class, sir, or Jews? It is a racial question only, but I don't want to make it as a racial biased. But I want to know why exactly they are dominating the knowledge domain. Is there any specific reason for them, sir?
I have not gone to any kind of that studies. And it's I think nothing to do with the racial or geographical. It's such a personal focus. A person's focus on what they're doing only determines how good you are in anything. I don't think that is it. In genetic studies so far, I'm not focused on that particular area. I don't think any scientist would believe that why the Jews are so intelligent or Brahmins are intelligent. We should study, conduct studies on their brains, DNA studies. If you agree to that point, you have agreed to the very idea of that certain castes are intelligent and certain races are intelligent. So there are no studies so far. It only attributed to the personal ability of each and every person that he or she are so serious of what they do, and they excel in that. Otherwise, they say, see, if say for example, a Brahmin is so intelligent, a Sudra is not. You look at the time available for a Brahmin to tinker with ideas. They are always free throughout the life. That is not the question of Sudra. He has to work. Where is the time? Why certain people become philosophers? They have time. Why Greeks and the Romans became philosophers? They had time in the city-urban culture. It's not that thinking is limited to any caste, race, or gender something. It depends upon what your cultural and social conditions are, how much time you have, how much, in fact, you are sponsored, you are a non-problematic person, you are not being troubled by any resource lack or support mechanisms. It certainly, if you continuously focus on one area of, dealing with one theme of dealing with in our life, certainly you will flourish. And sometimes individual, effort, sometimes IQ scientifically proved is that IQ is a bit higher. That is scientific in certain individuals, and only IQ probably determines. And there is no common study to prove that IQ is much higher in Brahmins or Jews in this world. So that is, I don't agree with that argument. Only thing that determines is IQ.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Now I invite Dr. P.J. B.G. Joseph to give vote of thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. So it is my pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks to a person who is not want this actually. He is not like a formal person, and he don't like the rhetoric statements. Even though that is the case, it is our tradition to record our appreciations and our gratitude. So on behalf of the Bharathidasan University, HRTC, on behalf of our coordinator and the participants, we would like to sincerely thank and sincerely record our gratitude for your thought-provoking session, sir. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you, sir.
Welcome. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Rao. Thank you. I thank along with B. Joseph. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
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 Thank you.